After being shuffled through the system since he was a child, a young man about to age out is given a key to a strange inheritance, a single grain bin on a forgotten patch of land. What he discovers buried beneath it will unearth a family secret that forces him to choose between a fortune and a truth worth fighting for. And if you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, or that the world had already decided who you were, I want you to hit that subscribe button, because these stories are for us. The air in Mr. Henderson's office always smelled like stale coffee and regret. It was a smell I had grown to associate with the end of things. For 2 years, since the last foster placement fell through when I was 16, the Northgate Group home had been my life. 2 years of scheduled meals, mandatory counseling, and the low, constant hum of fluorescent lights. 2 years of waiting for my 18th birthday, a day that felt less like a celebration and more like a cliff edge. And now, here it was. Henderson slid a thick manila envelope across the gray laminate of his desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Leo, this is it," he said, his voice attempting a warmth it couldn't quite achieve. He was a man worn smooth by institutional bureaucracy. "Your final discharge papers, your birth certificate, social security card, everything you need to become a productive member of society." He smiled a tired, practiced smile. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were already moving on to the next file, the next kid in the system. I was a box being checked, a case being closed. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the weight of a life I hadn't yet lived, but was already responsible for. My life, such as it was, fit inside a single cardboard box at the foot of my bed. A few changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of a book about stars, and a faded photograph of 2 people I barely remembered. My parents. "There's one other thing," Henderson said, pulling out a smaller, crisper envelope. This one was different. It was a business envelope, addressed to me in care of the group home. "This came for you about a week ago, from a law office. We held it until today, as per the instructions." He handed it to me. My name was typed neatly on the front, Leo Vance. It looked strange to see it looking so official. I turned it over in my hands. It was thin but stiff. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, a letter from a firm called Albright and Associates, and a small, tarnished brass key taped to the bottom. The letter was short, formal. It informed me that upon the occasion of my 18th birthday, as per the last will and testament of my maternal grandfather, Arthur Gable, I was to take possession of his sole remaining asset. It listed a property address and a parcel number in a county I'd never heard of, a place called Sparrow Creek. It then detailed the transfer of title, which had been legally recorded 2 years prior. The purchase price was listed as $7. $7. I read the line 3 times. It felt like a typo, a cruel joke. Who sells property for $7? I looked at Henderson, my confusion plain on my face. He just shrugged. "Your grandfather was eccentric, from what the file says. He passed away a little over a year ago. This was all he had left, apparently." I didn't remember my grandfather, not really. I had a vague, shadowy memory of a man with rough hands and a quiet voice, a man who smelled like sawdust and soil. He'd disappeared from my life around the same time my parents did, when I was 6. The official story was that he wasn't fit to take me, that he was unreliable, a drifter. So I went into the system, and he just vanished. The letter ended with a final, stark instruction. Enclosed was a one-way bus ticket to a town near Sparrow Creek. It was valid for the next 48 hours. The key, it said, was for the structure on the property. That was it. No welcome, no explanation. Just a key, a bus ticket, and a $7 inheritance. I stared at the key. It was small and simple, the kind you'd use for a padlock. It was my only inheritance. A key to nothing. A final bitter punchline from a ghost I never knew. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, Leo, good luck out there." He stood up, a clear dismissal. The meeting was over. My childhood was over. I picked up the heavy manila envelope and the strange letter from the lawyer. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out of his office, the smell of stale coffee following me down the hall. I walked past the common room where younger kids were watching cartoons, their faces blank. I walked past my room, not even bothering to look inside. I already had my box of belongings with me. I walked right out the front door of the Northgate group home and didn't look back. The sun was bright, and for a moment it was blinding. The world outside the institution felt vast and terrifyingly quiet. I was 18. I was free. And I had absolutely nowhere to go, except towards a $7 punchline in a place called Sparrow Creek. The bus station was a symphony of quiet desperation. People waiting, people leaving, people with hollows in their eyes that I recognized from the mirror. I sat on a hard plastic bench, the cardboard box between my feet, the envelopes tucked safely inside my jacket. The bus ticket felt like a judgment. One way. There was no coming back from this, because there was nothing to come back to. I spent the last of the cash the state gives you, $150, meant to last until you find a job, on a bottle of water and a stale sandwich. The money felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I kept rereading the lawyer's letter. Sparrow Creek. The name itself sounded like a place where things went to be forgotten. I tried to remember my grandfather, Arthur. The file Henderson mentioned called him eccentric. My last foster mother, before she'd had enough of my silence, had called him something else. A good-for-nothing who abandoned his own grandson. Was this his final act of abandonment, leaving me a useless plot of land and a key to a shed in the middle of nowhere? For a moment, a hot, useless anger flared in my chest. It was better than the cold numbness that had been my constant companion for years. I wanted to rip the letter and the ticket to shreds, throw the key into a storm drain, and just walk. Walk anywhere. But where? I had no one. No friends to call, no family to take me in. The system had been my parent, and it had just cut the cord. The choice was simple. The uncertainty of the streets in a city that didn't want me, or the uncertainty of a strange inheritance from a man I didn't know. At least the key represented a place, a physical location, a door to open. It was the thinnest thread of hope, but it was the only one I had. The bus sighed to a stop, its brakes hissing. The driver announced the route, a string of small, unheard-of towns, with Sparrow Creek's nearest stop, a place called Harmony, listed near the end. I picked up my box, my knuckles white. I joined the line of other ghosts shuffling onto the bus. I found a seat by a window smeared with grime and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city pulled away, its familiar gray landscape of concrete and chain-link fences slowly giving way to suburbs, then to highways, then to something else entirely. For hours, I watched the world scroll by. I watched families in cars, laughing. I watched trucks barreling down the highway, their drivers solitary figures on their own long journeys. I thought about the $7. It was such a specific, insulting number. Not a gift, not a real sale. It was a token, a gesture so small it felt more like a curse. My grandfather could have just let the state take the land. He could have done nothing. But he didn't. He paid a lawyer to draw up a document, to track me down in the system, to make sure this key and this deed found their way into my hands on this specific day. Why? The question echoed in the empty space in my head, a rhythm that matched the drone of the bus engine. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The landscape grew flatter, emptier. The towns we passed through got smaller, the streetlights fewer and farther between. This was a different kind of emptiness from the city. It was wider, deeper. It was the kind of emptiness that could swallow you whole. I must have fallen asleep because I woke with a jolt to the driver calling out, "Harmony! Next stop, Harmony!" I sat up, my heart pounding. Outside there was nothing but darkness. A single blinking yellow light marked an intersection up ahead. I gathered my box and my jacket, my hands clumsy with sleep and anxiety. I was the only one getting off. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a closed-down gas station. The driver opened the door, letting in a rush of cold, damp air that smelled of wet earth and pine. "This is it, kid," he said, not unkindly. "Town's about a mile that way." He jerked a thumb down a dark two-lane road. "Good luck." I stepped off the bus and into the immense, silent dark. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking until they were gone, leaving me in a profound and total blackness. The only light was the lonely blinking yellow overhead. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the frantic beat of my own heart. I was here, wherever here was. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. I started walking down the road, into the dark, towards a town I didn't know and a legacy I couldn't begin to comprehend. The walk into Harmony felt like walking into the past. The town was a single main street, lined with brick buildings, their windows dark. A post office, a general store with a wooden porch, a bar with a flickering neon sign that just said, "Tavern." It was a place that time had seemingly forgotten to update. There were no hotels, no motels. I spent what was left of my first night of freedom huddled on a bench outside the closed post office, my box as a pillow, my jacket pulled tight. Sleep didn't come. Every creak of a sign in the wind, every distant dog bark had me sitting bolt upright. I was exposed, vulnerable. The feeling was familiar, but the context was new. Here, there were no locked doors or night supervisors. The only thing protecting me was the darkness itself. At dawn, the town slowly came to life. An old pickup truck rumbled past. The lights of the general store flickered on. A man in overalls came out and started sweeping the porch, giving me a long, curious look, but saying nothing. I felt like a stray dog, and I probably looked like one. My stomach growled. I went into the store, the bell above the door announcing my arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place with my mood. The air inside smelled of sawdust, coffee, and bacon. An older woman with kind eyes and a tired face stood behind the counter. "Help you?" she asked. I bought a cup of coffee and a prepackaged donut, counting out the coins carefully. "You new in town?" she asked, her curiosity gentle. "Just passing through," I lied. I couldn't bring myself to say, "I live here now." I own a $7 piece of whatever is outside this town. Looking for a property out on Sparrow Creek Road, I said, trying to sound casual. Know where that is? Her expression shifted. The kindness was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Pity, maybe. Sparrow Creek? Sure. It's about 3 miles out, past the old bridge. Not much out there anymore. Just the old Gable place. Gable, my grandfather's name. My name, in a way. That's the one, I said, my voice tight. She poured herself a coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. Arthur's place. Haven't seen anyone out there since he passed. You family? I just nodded. I didn't have the energy for a long explanation that I didn't even understand myself. He was my grandfather. She nodded slowly. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. A lot of folks around here thought he was strange, but he was always fair with me. She looked at my box, then back at my face. It's a long walk. My husband's heading out that way to check some fences in about an hour. He can give you a lift if you like. I was so used to suspicion, to people keeping their distance, that the simple offer of kindness felt like a shock to the system. I'd appreciate that, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a rattling pickup truck, driven by a man who introduced himself only as Bill. He was as quiet as his wife was talkative, which suited me fine. We drove out of the small town, crossed a rusty metal bridge that groaned under the weight of the truck, and turned onto a gravel road. Sparrow Creek Road. The road was flanked by overgrown fields and dense woods. We passed a few collapsing barns and one boarded-up farmhouse, but mostly there was just nature, slowly reclaiming everything. "This is it," Bill said, pulling the truck over. I looked out the window. There was nothing. Just a stretch of tall, brown weeds, a few scraggly pine trees, and beyond them, a single, solitary structure. A metal grain bin, the corrugated steel panels streaked with rust. A faded logo of some long-gone farming cooperative barely visible on its side. It stood there like a forgotten monument, lonely and absurd. "This is the Gable place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This is it," Bill confirmed. "Arthur bought this little patch years ago. Never did anything with it but put up that bin. People used to joke he was going to store his secrets in it." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Guess it's yours now. You need a hand with your box?" "No," I said, my voice hollow. "I've got it." I got out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my worn-out sneakers. I pulled my box from the back. Bill gave a short nod. "Well, the store's open till 6. And with that, he put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving me in a cloud of dust and silence. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The grain bin, my inheritance. It was worse than I could have imagined. It was a joke. A big, round, metal joke. The wind rustled through the tall grass, making a sound like a long, slow sigh. I walked towards it, my feet sinking into the soft earth. The parcel of land wasn't large, maybe an acre or two, hemmed in by woods on 3 sides. The bin was about 30 feet tall, maybe 15 feet in diameter. A small metal door was set into its base, held shut by a heavy-duty padlock. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the tarnished brass key. My hands were shaking. This was the moment of truth. The moment I'd find out if this was all just a cruel prank or something else. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, but with a bit of force, it turned. The lock clicked open with a loud, metallic snap that echoed in the quiet. I pulled the lock free, my heart hammering against my ribs. I took a breath, grabbed the handle, and pulled the door open. The inside of the grain bin smelled of dust, rust, and dry, dead things. For a moment, I was afraid to look, afraid it would be completely empty, the final confirmation of my own worthlessness. But it wasn't empty. Light from the open door cut a bright wedge across the circular dirt floor, illuminating a strange collection of objects. Against the far wall, neatly arranged, were tools. A brand new shovel and a pickaxe, their wooden handles smooth and pale. A heavy-duty flashlight, a crowbar, a coil of thick rope, a 5-gallon jug of water. It was a pre-packaged survival kit. My eyes scanned the space. In the center of the floor, something was drawn in the dirt. A large, crude square, about 6 feet by 6 feet. And in the very middle of that square, a small, flat rock had been placed. It looked deliberate, intentional. My grandfather, the man they called eccentric, the man they called a drifter. He hadn't left me an empty shell. He had left me a task. He had left me tools. He had left me a map drawn in the dirt. A cold dread mixed with a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe even a sliver of hope. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a message. I stepped inside, the metal door swinging shut behind me with a deep, resonant boom, plunging me into near-total darkness. The sound was like a vault closing. For a second, panic seized me. I fumbled for the door, my hands scraping against the cold, curved steel wall. I found the handle and pushed it open again, gulping in the fresh air, my heart racing. I would not be trapped. I grabbed the flashlight and clicked it on. Its powerful beam cut through the gloom. I shone it on the square in the dirt. It was just a drawing. But the tools, the water, they were real. What was I supposed to do? Dig? Here? It seemed insane. But what other option did I have? I had 3 miles to the nearest town, a handful of dollars in my pocket, and a world that had no place for me. This place, as strange and desolate as it was mine. It was the only thing that was mine. I set my box down. I picked up the shovel. The weight of it felt good in my hands. It felt real, solid. I walked to the center of the bin, to the square drawn in the dust. I kicked the small rock aside. I placed the tip of the shovel against the hard-packed earth and put my foot on the edge of the blade. I pushed. The ground was hard, resistant. For years I had been told what to do, where to go, who to be. My life had been a series of reactions to things I couldn't control. But this was different. This was an action, my action. I pushed harder, putting all my weight, all my frustration, all my fear into it. The shovel blade broke through the crust of the earth with a satisfying crunch. I lifted the first shovelful of dirt and tossed it aside. Then another, and another. I started digging. I didn't know what I was digging for. Maybe a box, maybe a grave, maybe nothing. But as I worked, a rhythm took over. The scrape of the shovel, the thud of the dirt, the sound of my own breathing echoing in the metal cylinder. With every shovelful, I felt like I wasn't just digging into the ground. I was digging my way through the layers of my own life. Digging through the anger, the neglect, the loneliness. I dug until my arms ached and my back screamed. I dug until sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I dug until the sun began to sink, and the light coming through the open door turned from white to gold to orange. The hole was now about 3 feet deep. My hands were raw, blistered, but I didn't stop. I switched to the pickaxe when I hit a layer of dense, clay-like soil mixed with rocks. The jarring impact of the axe striking the ground traveled up the handle and into my bones. It was brutal, punishing work. But I kept going, driven by a desperate, nameless need to see what was underneath. And then it happened. The pickaxe struck something that wasn't rock or dirt. It made a hollow, metallic thunk, a sound that was completely different. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I dropped the pickaxe and fell to my knees, my hands scrabbling in the loose dirt. I felt it, a flat, hard surface. Wood. I used the shovel, then my bare hands, to clear the dirt away. A shape began to emerge from the earth, a rectangle of thick, weathered planks. A trapdoor. It was about 4 feet by 3 feet, with a heavy, rusted iron ring set into one side. My heart was a drum against my ribs. This was it. This was what he had left for me. I grabbed the iron ring with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. It was swollen with damp, or maybe it was locked from the inside. I grabbed the crowbar, my hands trembling slightly. I wedged the tip into the seam between the door and its frame and put all my weight on it. The wood groaned in protest. I pulled again, harder. There was a loud crack, the sound of splintering wood, and the door lifted a few inches. A puff of cool, musty air escaped from the opening, a smell like a cellar, like a tomb. It smelled like secrets. I worked the crowbar around the edges, prying it open inch by inch, until I could finally lift the heavy door all the way back on its creaking hinges. I peered down into the darkness. A set of steep wooden steps led down into a black, silent space. I shone my flashlight into the hole. The beam revealed a small, square room, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were lined with cinder blocks. The floor was poured concrete. It was a bunker, a tiny, hand-dug, hidden bunker beneath a grain bin in the middle of nowhere. My grandfather hadn't just left me a plot of land. He had built me a shelter. He had built me a hiding place. I sat on the edge of the hole for a long time, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The sheer effort of it all was overwhelming. The planning, the labor. To dig this hole, to build this room, to hide it so perfectly. This wasn't the act of an eccentric. This was the act of a man with a purpose, a desperate purpose. Slowly, cautiously, I swung my legs over the edge and started down the wooden steps. They were sturdy. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of damp earth and concrete. The last step landed me on the solid floor. I was standing in the center of the small room. I swept the flashlight beam around the space. It was sparse, but again, it was intentional. In one corner, there was a small cot with a thin mattress and a neatly folded wool blanket. Next to it, a stack of canned goods, beans, soup, fruit, enough for a few weeks. There were more jugs of water, a portable camping toilet, a battery-powered lantern, and on a small makeshift table built from wooden crates, there was a single object. A metal lunchbox, the old-fashioned kind, with a faded cartoon character on the front. It looked ancient. It looked like something a child would carry. My breath hitched. With a sense of reverence I didn't know I possessed, I walked over and picked it up. It wasn't heavy. I sat down on the edge of the cot, the cold of the concrete seeping through my jeans, and placed the lunchbox on my lap. The latches were stiff with rust. I worked them open with my thumb, and the lid creaked open. Inside, there was no food. There was a stack of $100 bills, held together with a rubber band. And underneath the money, there was a letter. It was a thick stack of folded, yellowed paper, covered in a tight, spidery handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull it out. I unfolded the first page. The letter began without a greeting. "If you are reading this, Leo, then you made it. You found your way here, and I am gone. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for all of it." I had to stop and take a breath. The words on the page felt like a voice from the grave, a voice I barely remembered, but my soul recognized. "There is so much I need to tell you, and so little time to write it. I couldn't be the one to raise you. They told you I was unfit, that I was a drunk, a drifter. It was easier to let them think that. The truth is, I was a coward. I was scared. What happened to your parents? It wasn't an accident. And I was scared they would come for you, too. So I hid you. I hid you in the one place I thought they would never look, right in the arms of the state. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, leaving you on those steps. It broke me in a way you can't imagine. I read the words again and again. It wasn't an accident. A cold wave washed over me, so intense I felt dizzy. The story I'd been told my whole life, a car crash on a rainy night, a tragic accident, was a lie. The foundation of my entire miserable existence was a lie. I kept reading, my eyes flying across the page. This place, this bunker, it's not much, but it's a start. It's a place to be safe while you figure out your next move. The money should last you a while if you're careful. Buy food in town. Be quiet. Be invisible. That's how you survive. I built this place with my own hands, thinking of you every step of the way. Every shovel of dirt, every cinder block was for you. I wanted to give you one thing no one could ever take away. A piece of ground that is well and truly yours. A place to put your feet down. I could feel tears welling in my eyes, hot and sharp. Tears of grief, of anger, of a profound and shattering sense of loss for a man I never got to know. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me. This whole time he had been watching from a distance, planning, preparing this final, desperate gift. He had painted himself as a villain to keep me safe. The letter went on, explaining the land purchase, the $7 sale. It was a legal maneuver he'd read about, a way to create a clear and defensible title, something about quitclaim deeds and statutory periods. He knew powerful people would try to take this land, and he had used his last few years to build a fortress of paperwork around it, just as he had built this physical fortress under the ground. At the bottom of the last page, there was one final paragraph. There is another box, a fireproof one. It is hidden in here. It contains the rest of the story, the truth about your parents, the proof. Once you open it, there is no going back. Your life will change forever. You can choose to leave it be. You can take the money and walk away. Go build a life somewhere new. Forget Sparrow Creek, forget me, forget all of it. No one would blame you. Or you can open it. The choice is yours, Leo. It has to be yours. Be safe, my boy. Arthur. I let the letter fall into my lap. My mind was reeling. The small, dark room felt like it was spinning. A choice. He had left me a choice. Freedom or the truth. A new life or an old war. I looked at the stack of cash. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I could walk out of this bunker, out of this town, and never look back. I could get a car, an apartment in a city where no one knew my name. I could be normal. Or I could find that other box. I could learn the truth that had cost my parents their lives and my grandfather his reputation. I could step into a story that had started long before I was born. I ran a hand over my face. I was exhausted. My body ached from the digging, and my mind ached from the revelations. I looked around the small concrete room, this tiny hidden space. It was the first home I'd had in 12 years. My grandfather had built it for me. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the lunchbox. I put the money back too. I wasn't ready to make a choice. Not yet. First, I needed to sleep. I lay down on the cot, pulling the rough wool blanket over me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was in a place that was mine. A place with a locked door, or at least a hidden one. I was underground, buried, but for the first time, I felt something like safety. The darkness was total, the silence absolute. And in that silence, I cried. I cried for the little boy left on the steps of a county building. I cried for the parents I never knew. And I cried for the strange, brave, broken old man who had loved me enough to disappear. I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation. I slept on the cot in the bunker, the deep, dreamless sleep of the utterly exhausted. I ate cold beans from a can, drank the water my grandfather had left, and slowly, my body began to recover from the ordeal of the dig. My mind, however, was a different story. It was a whirlwind of grief and confusion. I would read Arthur's letter over and over, the paper growing soft and frayed from my handling. Each word was a piece of a puzzle I was only just beginning to see. He hadn't abandoned me. He had sacrificed himself for me. The narrative of my life, the one I had built around being unwanted, had crumbled to dust. And in its place was something far more complex and terrifying. A legacy, a responsibility. On the 3rd day, I knew I couldn't hide in my hole forever. The money in the lunchbox was a tool, not a solution. I needed supplies. I needed a plan. I took $200 from the stack, put it in my pocket, and climbed the steps out of the bunker. The daylight was blinding. The world felt too bright, too loud after the quiet dark below. I covered the trapdoor with dirt, trying to make it look as undisturbed as possible, and walked the 3 miles back to Harmony. Walking into the general store felt different this time. I wasn't just a drifter. I was a resident. A secret resident, but a resident nonetheless. The woman behind the counter, whose name I learned was Martha, gave me a warm smile. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm staying," I said, and the words felt true. I bought what I needed: bread, cheese, peanut butter, more canned goods, a propane stove, a new lantern, batteries, work gloves. I was careful not to buy too much, not to draw attention. As Martha rang up my purchases, a man in a crisp suit came in. He was not from Harmony. He wore expensive shoes, a tailored coat, and an air of impatient authority that sucked the warmth right out of the room. He nodded curtly at Martha, and then his eyes landed on me. It was a quick, dismissive glance, but it lingered for a second too long. A flicker of assessment. He was looking for someone. "Can I help you?" Martha asked him, her tone suddenly cooler. "I'm looking for the owner of the old Gable property," the man said, his voice smooth and professional. My blood ran cold. I kept my back to him, pretending to study a display of fishing lures. "Don't know who that would be," Martha said, her voice flat. It was a lie, and we both knew it. "It was recently transferred to a Leo Vance," the man continued, and the sound of my name in his mouth felt like a violation. I represent the West Wind Development Group. We're acquiring land in the area for a new resort project. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for that parcel. West Wind Development. The name meant nothing to me, but the timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. They were the ones my grandfather had warned me about. "Never heard of him," Martha said, putting my groceries into a bag. "That'll be $42.50. I fumbled with the $100 bill, my hands suddenly clumsy. I didn't dare look at the man. I could feel his eyes on my back. I took my change and my bag, mumbled a "thank you" to Martha, and walked out of the store, my heart pounding. I didn't run. I walked at a steady pace, forcing myself to be calm, to be invisible. But I felt his gaze on me the entire time I walked down the main street. I didn't look back until I was out of town, across the groaning metal bridge. I was terrified. They had found me, or at least they knew my name. The safety of my anonymity was already gone. The 3-mile walk back to my grain bin felt like 100. Every car that passed on the main road made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the man in the suit following me. By the time I got back to my property, I was drenched in a cold sweat. I scrambled into the bin, uncovered the trap door, and descended into the bunker as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. I sealed the trap door above me, plunging myself back into the comforting darkness. I sat on the cot, my groceries forgotten on the floor, and tried to calm my racing heart. West Wind Development. A generous offer. It was the easy way out my grandfather had written about. Take the money and run. And for a moment, it was all I wanted to do. This wasn't my fight. I was just a kid. I had survived the system. Wasn't that enough? Did I really need to take on a powerful development company? But then I thought of Arthur's letter. What happened to your parents? It wasn't an accident. I thought of the man in the suit, his cold eyes, his predatory confidence. He wasn't just acquiring land, he was hunting, and I was the prey. The choice was no longer an abstract idea on a piece of paper. It was here. It was now. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But underneath the fear, something else was stirring. A slow, burning anger. They had taken my parents. They had forced my grandfather into a life of exile and secrecy. They had left me to grow up an orphan in a system that didn't care. And now they were coming to bulldoze the last piece of my family's history and build a resort. No, I couldn't run. I wouldn't. This little patch of dirt, this rusty grain bin, this tiny concrete room, it was all I had left of them. It was all I had of myself. It was time to find the other box. I took the new lantern and shone its bright, steady light around the small room. It is hidden in here, Arthur had written. Where would a man like him hide the most important thing in the world? I started with the obvious places. I looked under the cot, behind the stacked cans. Nothing. I ran my hands over the cinder block walls, pressing each one, looking for a loose block, a hidden compartment. The walls were solid, seamless. I tapped the concrete floor, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing but solid concrete. I sat back on the cot, frustrated. I thought about my grandfather, a man who built things, a man who was clever, who planned. He wouldn't have just buried it randomly. The hiding place would be meaningful. My eyes fell on the makeshift table, the one made from 2 stacked wooden crates. It seemed too obvious, but I pulled the crates apart anyway. They were just old vegetable crates, stamped with the name of a farm I didn't recognize. I was about to put them back when I noticed something. On the bottom of the top crate, almost invisible in the rough wood, was a single, small, hand-carved star. It was no bigger than my thumbnail. A star. The book I owned, the only thing I had kept with me through all the foster homes, was a book about constellations. It was a book my father had given me, one of my only clear memories of him. My grandfather must have known. It was a sign. For me. My heart started to beat faster. I turned the crate over and examined the bottom. It was constructed of simple wooden slats. But one of the slats looked different. The grain of the wood didn't quite match. I took out my pocket knife and pried at the edge of it. It was a false bottom. The slat came away in my hand, revealing a shallow, hidden compartment. And nestled inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a heavy black metal box. It was a military-style, fireproof and waterproof document box. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a combination dial. Of course, another test. I stared at the dial. 3 numbers. What 3 numbers would he have chosen? A birthday? An address? I tried my own birthday. Nothing. I tried the date of his death, which was in the lawyer's letter. Nothing. I felt a wave of despair. It was right here. The truth was right here in my hands, and I couldn't get to it. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the box. Think, Leo. Think like him. A man who hides his grandson to protect him. A man who builds a secret bunker. A man who leaves a star as a clue. The date. The date he left me at the county building. The day my life officially ended and began again. I didn't know the exact date. It wasn't in my file. No one ever told me. It was just a blank space. But maybe he had left me that too. I scrambled back to the lunchbox and took out his letter. I read it again, slowly, this time looking for numbers, for dates, for anything. And then I saw it, a detail I had skimmed over before. In the paragraph about hiding me, he wrote, "It was the hardest thing I have ever done, leaving you on those steps on a cold October morning. The 10th of the month. I'll never forget it. October 10th. 10. But what was the year? The file said I went into the system when I was 6. I was 18 now. That was 12 years ago. I did the math in my head. That would make it 12 years before this year. I tried to remember what year it was, the date, things that never mattered in the group home. I found the bus ticket. The date was stamped on it. I subtracted 12 years. It was a guess, a long shot. My hands were slick with sweat as I turned the dial, right to the year. Left past it once, and back to 10. Right to 10. I pulled the latch. It clicked open. My breath left me in a whoosh. I opened the box. Inside, there was no money. There was only paper, stacks of it, and photographs, and a small cassette tape recorder with a single tape inside. It was a meticulously organized archive of a crime. I lifted the first stack of papers. It was a copy of the official police report on my parents' car accident. Single vehicle, lost control on a wet road. Case closed. But underneath it was another report, a private one, compiled by an investigator my grandfather had hired. It was filled with details the police had missed or ignored. The brake lines on the car hadn't failed. They had been cut, expertly. There were no skid marks on the road. The accident had happened on a stretch of road owned by West Wind Development, a company that had been trying to buy my parents' farm for months. My parents, the report said, had been organizers, community leaders fighting against West Wind's expansion into the valley. They were the last holdouts. I felt a wave of nausea. I looked at the photographs. There were pictures of my parents, young and smiling, standing on the porch of a farmhouse I didn't recognize. My father had his arm around my mother, and she was holding a baby. Me. There were other photos too, surveillance photos. A black sedan parked down the road from the farm. A photo of a man, the same man I had seen in the general store, talking to a uniformed police officer. The date stamp on the photo was from the week before my parents died. It all started to click into place, a horrifying mosaic of corruption and murder. Westwind hadn't just wanted the land. They had wanted to silence the opposition. And they had succeeded. My grandfather Arthur had figured it all out. But he was one man against a powerful corporation that had the local authorities in its pocket. To challenge them directly would have been suicide, and it would have put me, the only thing left of his daughter, directly in their crosshairs. So he made an impossible choice. He hid the evidence, and he hid me. He let the world think he was a deadbeat, and he vanished, all to buy me time, to buy me a future. Finally, I picked up the small tape recorder. There was a label on the cassette in my grandfather's handwriting. For Leo, my confession. My hand trembled as I pressed the play button. A hiss of static, and then his voice. It was older than I remembered, rougher, strained with grief, but it was him. Leo, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and it means you found the truth, or the truth found you. His voice cracked. I need you to hear this from me. After your mom and dad, after they were murdered, I went to the police. I showed them what I had, the cut brake lines, the threats. They laughed at me. They told me I was a grieving old fool. The chief of police, he told me to drop it, for my own good, and for yours. He took a shaky breath. That night, the man from Westwind, the one in the pictures, he came to the farm. He didn't threaten me, he just talked. Talked about how sad it would be if something happened to the orphaned grandson. How kids can get lost in the system, disappear. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. I had two choices. I could fight, and they would take you from me. Or I could disappear, and you would live. So I made you disappear first. I drove you to the city that night. I told you we were playing a game, a hiding game. I left you where I knew they'd find you, where you'd be safe, in the belly of the beast. It was the only way, Leo, the only way to keep you alive. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. I sat there in the bunker, in the tomb my grandfather had built, and I understood everything. The $7 sale, the bunker, the hidden evidence. It was all part of a long, desperate, brilliant plan. A plan that had taken him the rest of his life to execute. He had armed me. He had given me a fortress, resources, and the truth. And he had given me the choice of what to do with it. The man from Westwind, Mr. Suit, was probably staying in the nicest hotel in the next county over, confident that the little orphan boy would be easy to scare off, that he'd take the generous offer and run. He thought I was a loose end. He had no idea I was the fuse. There was no choice anymore, not really. Running would mean letting them win. It would mean that my parents' deaths, my grandfather's sacrifice, my entire life of loss meant nothing. I would not let that happen. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming a story that had been stolen from me. I packed the fireproof box, the letter, and the tape recorder into my backpack. I left the bulk of the cash hidden in the bunker. I would only take what I needed. I climbed out of my sanctuary, my home, and sealed it up. I walked the 3 miles back to Harmony, but this time I wasn't scared. I was cold. I was focused. I walked into the general store. Martha was there, alone. She looked up, her expression worried. "He was in here again," she said quietly, "asking about you, left a card." She pushed a crisp, white business card across the counter. "Richard Price, Senior Acquisitions, West Wind Development." A phone number was listed below it. "Thank you," I said to her, my voice steady. "Can I use your phone? It's a local call." She nodded towards an old rotary phone on the end of the counter. My hands were steady now. I walked over to the phone. I looked at the lawyer's letter my grandfather had left me. Albright and Associates. The address was in Harmony. I dialed the number. A woman answered, her voice professional. "Albright and Associates?" "My name is Leo Vance," I said. "I need to speak with Ms. Albright. It's about my grandfather, Arthur Gable, and a company called West Wind Development." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Please hold." Ms. Albright's office was on the second floor of the building next to the post office. It was small and cluttered with books and files, but it was clean, and the window looked out over the main street. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened, without interruption, for almost an hour. I told her everything. I told her about the group home, the key, the grain bin, the bunker. I took out the fireproof box and laid the contents on her desk. The private investigator's report, the photographs, the tape recorder. I laid it all out, the whole ugly story. She picked up the PI report first, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. She examined the photographs with a small magnifying glass, her expression growing grimmer with each one. Finally, I pressed play on the tape recorder. We sat in silence and listened to my grandfather's final, heartbreaking confession. When it was over, Ms. Albright leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "I knew your grandfather, Leo," she said finally, her voice soft. "He came to me a few years ago to draw up his will and the transfer for this property. I thought he was a crazy old coot. I told him this $7 sale idea was bizarre, that it probably wouldn't hold up." She shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. "He was smarter than any of us. He created a clean chain of title that originated before West Wind started filing their primary development plans. He's put you in a legally defensible position. It's unorthodox, but it's brilliant." She looked at the evidence spread across her desk. "And this changes everything. This isn't a land dispute anymore. This is a wrongful death case, a criminal conspiracy." She looked at me, her gaze steady and serious. "Leo, you have to understand what you're doing. These people, West Wind, they are not just a company. They are powerful. They have deep pockets and long arms. If you pursue this, they will come after you. They will try to discredit you, to break you. They will paint you as a delinquent, an unstable kid looking for a payday. This will be the fight of your life." "They murdered my family," I said, my voice low but hard as steel. "They took my whole life from me. What else is there to do?" She studied my face for a moment, and then she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice shifting, becoming crisp and professional. "Then we fight. First things first. We file an injunction to halt any activity on or near your property, citing title dispute and potential evidence preservation. Then we take this evidence to the state attorney general's office. We go over the local authorities' heads. They're clearly compromised. She started making notes on a legal pad, her pen flying across the page. For the first time, I felt like I had an ally, a real one. Someone who saw the truth and wasn't afraid of it. "This will cost money," she said, not looking up. "A lot of it. Filing fees, expert witnesses. A fight like this could take years." "My grandfather left me some cash," I said. "It's hidden." "Good," she said. "Use it only when you have to. Live cheap. The less you have, the less they can attack. From now on, you're not just a kid who inherited some land. You're a plaintiff. You have to act like it." As I left her office, the sun was beginning to set. The meeting had given me a sliver of hope, but it was a fragile, dangerous thing. The fight was just beginning. That evening, I got a call on the burner phone Ms. Albright had insisted I buy. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Leo Vance," a smooth voice said. It was him, Richard Price. "I was hoping I might have a word with you." "I have a lawyer," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "All communication can go through her." There was a pause, then a soft, humorless chuckle. "A lawyer? That's quaint. Listen, kid, I don't know what stories you've been told, but that piece of land is worthless. It's scrub, sitting on top of bedrock. But for the sake of expedience, and as a gesture of goodwill, Westwind is prepared to offer you $250,000 for it. $250,000. Think about what you could do with that. A fresh start. Anywhere you want." It was a staggering amount of money. More than the cash in the bunker. It was the easy way out, gift-wrapped and tied with a bow. It was the escape I had dreamed of for years. But I heard my grandfather's voice on the tape. I saw the pictures of my parents. "The land is not for sale," I said, and hung up the phone. The war had begun. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and quiet paranoia. Ms. Albright filed the injunction. Westwind's lawyers immediately filed a motion to dismiss. The first battle was a battle of paper, fought by people in suits in offices 100 miles away. My role was to stay put, to stay quiet, and to hold the fort. I made the bunker my home. I organized it, cleaned it. I built shelves for the food, set up a small reading area with the lantern. I spent my days reading through the evidence, memorizing every detail of the case my grandfather had built. I spent my evenings sitting outside the grain bin, watching the stars come out, feeling the presence of my family in a way I never had before. This land wasn't just dirt. It was a graveyard. It was a memorial. And it was my home. The community of Harmony, small as it was, began to subtly show its support. Martha at the general store would always slip an extra apple or a day-old pastry into my bag. Bill, her husband, dropped off a load of firewood one afternoon, saying nothing, just nodding and driving away. People who had thought my grandfather was a strange old hermit were starting to see his story, and mine, in a different light. They were quiet, cautious people, but they had long memories. They remembered my parents. They remembered Westwind's aggressive tactics. My fight was becoming their fight, in a small way. One afternoon, a surveyor's truck tried to come down the road. I stood at the edge of my property line and held up the injunction papers Ms. Albright had given me. The man in the truck scowled, made a call on his phone, and after a heated conversation, backed his truck up and left. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I had held my ground. I had defended my home. That night, I decided to do something I hadn't let myself do before. I took out the old photograph of my parents, the one I had carried with me for years. I looked at their smiling faces. They weren't just tragic figures in a sad story anymore. They were fighters. They were heroes. And I was their son. I finally understood what my grandfather had given me. It wasn't just land or money or evidence. He had given me back my identity. He had given me a reason to fight. He had given me a home, not just a place to live, but a place to stand for something. The legal battle stretched from weeks into months. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition. West Wind's lawyers threw everything they had at us. They filed motions to have the case dismissed, claiming I was an unreliable narrator, a troubled kid from the system trying to extort money. They tried to paint my grandfather as senile and delusional. But Ms. Albright was a bulldog. She countered every motion, every delay, every attack. The evidence my grandfather had collected was too strong, too meticulous, and the tape of his confession was devastating. The State Attorney General's office, after initially being hesitant, finally opened a formal investigation into the deaths of John and Sarah Vance. The cold case was suddenly very hot. My life fell into a new routine. I worked on the land. I cleared brush, planted a small garden with seeds I bought in town. I reinforced the bunker, making it more of a home. I built a small rainwater collection system. The physical labor kept my mind from spinning out of control. It grounded me. Every shovelful of dirt, every nail I hammered, was an act of defiance. It was a declaration that I was here to stay. I was putting down roots, literally and figuratively. I got a part-time job washing dishes at the town's only diner. The pay was terrible, but it was my own money, earned with my own hands. It gave me a sense of independence that the cash in the bunker never could. The people in town stopped looking at me with pity or suspicion. They started looking at me with a quiet respect. They knew I was fighting a giant, and they knew I was doing it alone. Sometimes, a local farmer would leave a box of vegetables on my property line. The owner of the tavern would send me home from work with a hot meal. It was never spoken of, it was just done. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming part of the fabric of the place. The loneliness that had been my shadow for so long began to recede. It was replaced by a sense of purpose. I was no longer just Leo Vance, the orphan. I was Arthur Gable's grandson. I was John and Sarah Vance's son. I was the keeper of their story. The biggest breakthrough came 6 months into the fight. Ms. Albright called me, her voice electric with excitement. "They found him, Leo. The private investigator your grandfather hired. He's old now, retired, living in Florida. But he remembers the case. And he kept his original files, including tape-recorded interviews with 2 other families West Wind had forced out. He's willing to testify." It was the piece we were missing. A living witness who could corroborate my grandfather's evidence. The case against West Wind was no longer just circumstantial. It was becoming a tidal wave. A few weeks later, West Wind's lawyers requested a settlement conference. Richard Price was there. He looked older, tired. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a weary pragmatism. They offered me $5 million to drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. $5 million, a king's ransom. "And the investigation into my parents' deaths?" I asked, my voice steady. Their lawyer shrugged. "We can't control the Attorney General, but without your civil suit fueling the fire, it's likely to lose steam. It becomes a cold case again." They were offering me a fortune to buy my silence, to let my parents' murderers walk free, to let my grandfather's sacrifice be for nothing. I looked across the table at Richard Price, the man who had threatened my grandfather, the man whose company had destroyed my family. I thought about the life I could have with that money. I could disappear, be anyone I wanted to be, but I already knew who I was. "Thank you for the offer," I said to the lawyers, my voice clear and calm. "But this land is not for sale, and neither is my family's memory. We'll see you in court." I walked out of that conference room feeling 10 feet tall. I had made my choice. I had chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. I had chosen to honor the people who had given me life and the man who had saved it. The fight wasn't over. It would still be long and hard, and there was no guarantee of victory. But it didn't matter. I had found my home. Not the bunker, not the grain bin, not even the acre of land. My home was the purpose I had found standing on that land. It was the truth I was fighting for. The resolution wasn't like in the movies. There wasn't a dramatic courtroom confession. Westwind, facing a mountain of evidence and a PR nightmare, crumbled. They settled the wrongful death suit out of court for an amount that was staggering, but that was never the point. More importantly, the renewed state investigation led to indictments. Richard Price and 2 former executives were charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The old police chief, long since retired, was charged with perjury. Justice, after 20 years in the dark, was finally seeing the light of day. I didn't get my parents back. I didn't get back the years I lost in the system. The scars were still there, but the wounds had started to heal. I used a portion of the settlement money to set up a foundation in my parents' names, a legal aid fund for rural communities fighting against predatory corporate expansion. I wanted to make sure no other family had to go through what mine did. I kept the land. The grain bin still stands there, a rusty monument to my grandfather's love. The bunker is still there too, but it's not a hiding place anymore. It's a wine cellar. I hired a local crew and we built a small, simple house on the property, not far from the bin. It has big windows that look out over the woods. It's the first real home I've ever had. I never became a person who left. I stayed. Harmony is my town now. I know the people and they know me. I still have coffee at the general store with Martha sometimes. I still see Bill driving his old pickup. They are my community, my anchor. Sometimes I walk out to the edge of the property and I look at that grain bin. I think about that scared, angry kid who arrived here with nothing but a key and a box of old ghosts. He thought he was digging a hole to hide in. He had no idea he was digging a foundation. He had no idea that what he was building wasn't a bunker, but a life. Home isn't a place you're given. It's not a building. It's a choice. It's the place where you decide to stop running and start fighting. It's the ground you claim, not with a deed, but with your heart. My grandfather taught me that. He left me more than just land. He left me a map to myself. He taught me that even when you feel buried, you can dig your way out. You can find the light. And that's a lesson that I want to share with all of you. So many of us are handed stories about ourselves that aren't true, that we're not good enough, that we're alone, that our past defines our future. But you have the power to tell a new story. Maybe you don't have a grain bin and a hidden bunker, but you have a choice. You can choose to start digging. Dig for the truth of who you are. Dig for the purpose that will be your foundation. It's hard work. It will leave you with blisters on your hands and your heart. But it is the most important work you will ever do. If this story meant something to you, if it connected with a part of your own journey, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here for people who understand that the most important stories are the ones we have to fight for. And I want you to go down to the comments and tell me one thing. What is the foundation you are building in your own life? I read every comment, and your stories matter. Thank you for listening.